Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. Welcome to our seminar, American Politics After the 2020 Elections. I'm Neil Quilliam. I'm an Associate Fellow at the Middle East North Africa Program at Chatham House, and I also serve as a Senior Fellow at the King Faisal Center for Research in Islamic Studies. I'm very pleased to be with you this evening and to chair and host this seminar with our colleague, Dr. Keshishian, whom I know that all of you, if not most of you, will know and be familiar with his work. Before I introduce Dr. Keshishian, I should say our format this evening will be that he will speak for approximately 30, 35 or 40 minutes on our subject matter, sort of mapping out the US, domestic, foreign policy, and other matters. Please do ask questions as we go along. I will take them at the end of Dr. Keshishian's talk, but please posit your questions in the Q&A function and we will take it from there. And I would like to bring now our distinguished speaker to the fore. Dr. Keshishian, you're a senior fellow with the King Faisal Center. You've got a publications list along as both of our arms together, so I won't read through all of those. And you've got a very distinguished academic career, and you have been sort of in our worlds for a very long time. And I remember first coming across your first book on Saudi Arabia back in, I think it may have been 1990 or 2000, I think it was in fact. Anyway, Dr. Keshishian, I give you the floor, and if you could share with us your thoughts on America after the elections as they've just unrolled. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neil. I appreciate it. And I'm very happy to participate in this discussion this evening. As you've just heard, I don't mean to speak for a long time, but what I wanted to do is share some comments, some views that I have about what's going on in the United States in the aftermath of the critical elections that the United States just went through. And very briefly, let me tell you what I have in mind. I will talk very briefly about President Trump's presidency during the past 4 years, and then quickly jump into what I see as dramatic changes that will come with the Biden administration. And at the end of the talk, I will also share with you some personal thoughts about the future of the Biden administration as well, since we all know that 4 years pass very quickly. And I was just reminded a few moments ago that 4 years ago, I gave a similar talk at the center, except that we were not doing this through Zoom, but I was in Riyadh at the time. And we had just had the election of President Trump to the presidency. So we had the same kind of discussion at the time. And I remember very well that after the conversation that we had at the center in Riyadh, someone asked me the question what I thought about President Trump. And I said, not anything in particular, except that I was very much afraid of what was going to happen. President Trump has ruled rather robustly, if you would like to use that term. He has ruled through Twitter, hopefully something that will come to an end, because that is no way to run the world's most important power. There was a great deal of divisiveness in his administration. And of course, what he wanted from the very beginning, and he said so unabashedly, he wanted fire and fury. He wanted maximum pressure on just about everyone on the planet, from Kim Jong-un to Ali Khamenei in Iran to everybody else. Instead, what we got during the past 4 years was minimum response. President Trump has been quite shy in terms of acting. He's been very robustly speaking about everything under the sun, but his responses have been very minimal. Of course, he fired a lot of people that worked for him, and I will mention a few of them in this conversation. But he fired a great deal of people. It doesn't mean that he didn't accomplish much. In fact, he accomplished quite a bit, and we have to give him his dues. The most important changes that he introduced had to do with the economy, there were dramatic changes in American economic affairs during the past 4 years, mostly for the better, even though that has not really diminished the overall debt of the country, something that was very much of a concern. In short, President Trump personalized his relationships with everybody, and instead of going through institutions, instead of going through the process of expert opinion, he in fact championed his own preferences. Some call these authoritarian preferences, but nevertheless, they were his own, and that's the way he is. He's not going to change. And he has conducted himself in a way that was almost conducive to a second term as of January of this past year. Then comes the coronavirus with the consequences that we know, and the whole thing collapsed. Now, he could have perhaps conducted himself differently during the past year in addressing the challenges, the health challenges that the country faced. He has not. Again, a choice. And he could have also responded differently with the changes, with the social and racial tensions that the United States experienced during the past several months, starting with the murder of George Floyd and of course other cases as well. So therefore, in short, President Trump's 4 years were truly fire and fury, but as I said, it did not really accomplish much. Now comes President Biden. He is, of course, an ultimate insider. He will govern in a way that he has conducted himself in Washington, D.C. for over 4 decades. He will probably be a lot more stable. There will be a lot more stability in the country, a lot more security, a lot more sanity, of course, and he will define his presidency in 3 words: cooperation, centralism, and civility. And we will see these in a way that the world has not been habituated to hearing during the past 4 years. Now, before I talk about foreign policy questions, because I know that everybody is interested in finding out about President-elect Biden's views on foreign policy, I want to say a few things about potential domestic priorities that a Biden administration will face. First, let me address this question of the COVID pandemic, because this is really the heart of the matter right now. The United States has over 256,000 people dead already in the past year. This is above and beyond what the normal changes occur in the country. This is a horrible legacy that is left behind. And the President of the United States has no choice but to address this. You cannot blame the different states, the different cities in terms of the policies that we're pursuing. You have got to have a national policy. You've got to have a sustainable policy whereby you come to the assistance of those who need it. Obviously, the deaths are surging in many parts of the United States, and the pandemic is not going anywhere. Hopefully, the vaccines that are now coming on the market, hopefully sooner rather than later, but realistically, not before the summer of 2021. So we have another 6 to 7 months of period of time where this is going to be lingering on everybody until such time when millions of people receive their vaccine jabs. And it's going to take a while. And President Biden, when he comes to power, on day one, he will inherit this. This will no longer be Trump's problem. It will be his problem. So he has to handle this. Now, this health crisis has economic repercussions as well. And the economic repercussions have got to be addressed very quickly. And there are already disputes between President Biden on the one hand and the Senate and the House of Representatives over a second financial package that will be distributed to a lot of people, a lot of businesses, and we will see who the new Secretary of the Treasury will be apparently tomorrow, Tuesday or Wednesday, we will have an appointment, and everybody is talking about the former chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, Janet Yellen, who is probably the top candidate, and she is an extremely capable individual. And this will be a priority, how to put back the economy in March. And there's no escaping the fact that on January 20th, this is going to become the Biden burden, and he has to shoulder it as best as he can. Finally, on the domestic issues, there is also something that cannot be pushed under the proverbial rug, and that is the racial and ethnic tensions that the United States is experiencing. There is no escaping this. Of course, this is not a problem that was only apparent during the Trump administration. It's been going on for many, many, many years, if not decades. During the Obama administration, there were several instances. During the Bush administration, there were similar instances as well. And previous presidents have not been able to handle this. We will see whether the Biden presidency will come to terms with the fact that there are real problems in the country, racial and ethnic problems, how police brutality, for example, will be addressed, whether or not it will be addressed, and how it will be addressed. There are also religious tensions that need to be addressed in this respect, because presumably President Biden will quickly abandon the so-called Muslim ban that President Trump initiated when he came into power by denying a lot of people from a number of Muslim countries access to American visas to travel to the United States. So therefore, the domestic package is really full, and I just hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of all the challenges that he faces. One can add climate pressure changes, one can add poverty questions, and there are still pockets of poverty in the country. These are growing, and you have a slew of other issues that need to be addressed. How he's going to address them, we will see. Time will tell. Now, in the second part of what I thought would be of interest to a lot of the attendees here are the foreign policy issues. If President Trump's motto was "Make America Great Again," or MAGA, if you would like, Biden's motto has been "America First has made America alone," and he wants to change that. In October 2020, Joe Biden said, "America First has made America alone." That is a profoundly important declaration, an acknowledgement on his part that the United States cannot exist by itself in the world. This is something which is dramatically different from his predecessor. And we will see whether or not he will follow in. But one hopes that, in fact, his convictions will be translated into policy. Now, already we know today's news that reveals that Antony Blinken, who has served as Deputy Secretary of State and as Deputy National Security Advisor in the Obama administration, will probably be appointed Secretary of State sometime tomorrow or Wednesday. Now, Blinken, who I will say a lot more about him, but Blinken has said dramatically, time and time again, that his vision, which means Biden's vision, because they've been together for almost 20, 25 years, his vision is to have a defense of global alliances. This is what he wants to restore. He is a globalist, he is an internationalist, and he wants to coalesce around Washington once again, skeptical international partners to come together, not just because there is competition with China or because there is competition with Russia or any other countries, but because the Biden vision is to have an internationalist outlook that is dramatically different from "Make America First Again" that President Trump articulated. There will be others who will also join into this internationalist train, if you would like. And apparently Jake Sullivan, who will become the next national security advisor, according to media reports, and Linda Thomas Greenfield, who is a long-term 35-year-old veteran, 35-year veteran of the Foreign Service, expected to be named Washington's ambassador to the United Nations. She is a Black woman and very capable, very well liked at the State Department. And Jake Sullivan, of course, about which I will say more when I talk about the Iran deal, was a well-known individual in the Obama administration, but much more than a duplicate of what we have seen in the Obama administration. These are individuals that have been loyal all this time to Joe Biden. Now, of course, the primary objective of this new team is going to be to restore confidence with European powers. Make no mistake about the fact that priority for the Biden administration will be Europe. And I was reading recently Bob Woodward's book, Rage, in which, just to give you an example, in which former Secretary of Defense Mattis was quoted as saying about President Trump, he has a central running argument, and Mattis saw that Europeans in the NATO alliance, Middle Easterners, South Korean, Japanese, all of these individuals for Mattis were essential. And he wanted these relationships to be nurtured and protected. And he, quote unquote now, and he said, all the victories were becoming just submerged by this mercurial, capricious, tweeting form of decision-making, end quote. In other words, what Mattis was wondering, what made Trump think anyone would make it alone in the world? Something that obviously a President Biden and his team will totally reject and will not accept. There will be no more jingoism. There will be no more misguided form of nationalism. There will not be false patriotism, as we have seen during the past 4 years. Now, Biden doesn't have his job easy, and he will have to spend a lot of diplomatic time, diplomatic credentials, if you would like, to have very stronger ties with European countries. Why is this important? Obviously, major powers, first and foremost, are concerned about trade issues around the world. The relationship between America and Europe is based fundamentally, first, of course, on cultural relationships and cultural ties, but nowadays, very much involved with trade, important trade ties. And everybody has seen what recently has happened in the Indo-Pacific region, where you had China corralling 14 nations and signing one of the most important free trade agreements with China. Now, this is of concern to the United States and to all of the European countries. And Mr. Blinken is very much interested in this subject, and he has spoken about it recently in one of his presentations, in which he said that he recognizes that Europeans are partners of first resort, not last resort, when it comes to contending with the challenges that Europe and America face together. Now, during the Donald Trump administration, there were disagreements between Washington and Brussels, not just on the Iran deal, but financial commitments to the NATO alliance over climate change, even President Trump's overall understanding of what the European Union's role in the world ought to be, whether or not this should be something important or not. Remember that President Trump supported Brexit, exhibited his very limited faith in the project of European integration. He does not believe in Europe at all. And against all of this, here comes the Joe Biden administration, in which all of a sudden the Europeans can take a breath of fresh air. German Chancellor Angela Merkel tweeted that she looked forward to future cooperation with President Biden. French President Emmanuel Macron called Biden and emphasized his desire to work with him. The EU leadership in general is very happy. That doesn't mean they were unhappy with Trump as president of the United States. They had to deal with Washington at any rate. But what they were concerned about was the fact that many of these individuals could not really find common ground with Washington. And this is something that they wanted to really address. Now, the second area of dramatic change that will come in the next phase is recalibration of ties with Russia. Here we are today, 23 November. The presidential elections in the United States have been over for over 2 weeks. And to date, President Putin has still not congratulated Joe Biden for his victory. And this is something which will not be forgotten, mark my words. Now, there will be some diplomatic time spent forging ties. We will see what will happen exactly. But I think that the relationships between Washington and Moscow will be very, very difficult, very different. And in my concluding remarks, I will talk about one of the things that the Biden administration might do with Russia. But I think that Russian-American ties are in for some rough times in the next period of history. Now, what will Washington do with China? This is the big question that is on everybody's mind. Washington obviously needs to take an active leadership role in the world and see how that role can be filled next to emerging powers like China, like India and others, but China obviously is in a different category all by itself. But to remind us once again about the changes that are taking place, Mr. Blinken in his recent talk said that even a country as powerful as the United States cannot handle all of the challenges in the world alone, which means that the relationship with China will have to be a lot more collegial. I'm not talking about friendship. I'm not talking about the fact that Washington and Beijing will be on the same wavelength, but there will be at least the kind of collegial exchanges that we have not seen during the past few years. Washington needs to work with other countries to deal with the challenges posed by China, especially with Europe, because obviously so much of the American-Chinese crisis is shared also by European power. But a Biden administration that will have to engage and work with China in areas of overlapping interests, such as climate change and global pandemics, cannot be ignored either. Obviously, President Trump was very fond of always saying that the coronavirus that leads to the COVID-19 disease came from China. It was a China virus for him. But whether or not it was not important, what is important really is to find out how the United States and China and other countries are going to work together to have a solution to the pandemic. Another area of major concern is the reassessment of contacts between the United States, Israel, Iran, and Turkey. These three countries in the Middle East, before I talk about the Arab world, need special attention as well. Everybody thinks that the Arab-Israeli conflict, because President Trump was so friendly with Prime Minister Netanyahu, that in fact things were so good that nothing could replace them. I think that Trump never got along with either Prime Minister Netanyahu or President Mahmoud Abbas. Eventually, let's not forget that President Trump ordered the closure of the Palestine Liberation Organization office in Washington. This was back in September 2018. He canceled nearly all US aid to the West Bank and Gaza. He also canceled a $360 million annual aid that was previously given by the United States to the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. Now, obviously, President Trump has used very colorful language to describe the Palestinian leadership. And according to Bob Woodward, in his book, Rage, he called Abbas a murderer and a liar, though he pretended to respect the Palestinian in public. I don't know whether he had the same kind of views about Prime Minister Netanyahu, but obviously relationship with Israel were on a different level, and they got along rather well, presumably because he changed the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and he has given just about anything that the Israelis wanted. President Biden will not change dramatically American policy towards Israel, but it will be calibrated. It will be a lot more even-handed, and the Palestinians will not be shortchanged. With Turkey, it's a totally different matter because there is a great deal of animosity that is very apparent between the Biden leadership and President Erdogan of Turkey. The two men just simply don't get along, and there are lots of reasons for it. We will see what the Turks will do to ingratiate themselves to the Biden administration. I'm not sure that there's much they can do. We will see what will happen. Let me now turn to Iran, which is, I think, everybody is really concerned about and afraid that things will go back to the way they were during the Obama administration. There are those who are very much concerned that Washington will re-embrace Iran, will put aside all of the human rights questions and so on. They will renegotiate the nuclear deal, and they will even negotiate on nuclear's ballistic missile activity, all of which will be obviously very difficult and very complicated. And we will see whether or not these analysts who are claiming that the Biden team might even conclude secret deals with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to turn a blind eye to the activities of the Iranians throughout the region, whether it is in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen, and elsewhere. In other words, there is fear that Washington will return to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, and that this will allow Tehran to boost once again its missile program and continue its support regional proxies, whether it's the Hashd al-Sha'bi in Iraq or Hezbollah in Lebanon and elsewhere. I think that the big mistake of the Obama administration, or the Obama deal, if you would like to call the Iran deal, was not to restrict Iran's ballistic missile program and its support to militias throughout the Middle East. And I think that another mistake that the Obama administration probably made was to undercut US partners in the region, including the Arab Gulf countries led by Saudi Arabia, of course. All of these, in my humble opinion, will now be corrected. I think there will be a very strict compliance that the next White House will work with allies to strengthen and extend the deal, while much more effectively pushing back against Iran's other destabilizing activities. Let me explain what I have in mind here. Now, returning to the deal is going to be very complicated, and sketching out a way out of a further agreement to restrain Iran's ballistic missile program and to limit its support to militias throughout the region. This is going to take a lot of hard work, not only because Iran is going to be a tough negotiator, but simply because the Iranians, once they turn around, will also want something in return. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, because the Iranians are already on record for saying that they will not renegotiate, that they're not interested in renegotiating, that the deal was signed in 2015 and that the Trump administration was responsible for stopping it, not they, that they abided by it. But be that as it may, let's assume for a second that the Iranians will be persuaded to come back to the negotiating table. And there are a couple of points that need to be addressed here. First, a new negotiation will have to really put its finger on whether or not the Iranians are cheating, both in the past and at present. And we will see whether or not the massively exceeded agreed to levels of stockpiled enriched uranium, for example, will be pushed under the rug, or whether or not this will be a priority for not only the United States, but also the European allies. Second, let us not forget also that the Iranian economy is in deep trouble, and it has really come to a near collapse by the tremendously powerful sanctions that have been imposed on it. But gone are the days, I would assume, of the Obama administration that was willing to tolerate these kinds of excesses. Add to this, another terrible mistake that the Obama administration made was in 2009, when it did not really support the so-called Green Revolution inside Iran. Instead, there were lots of other reasons that were advanced, that Iran was approaching this in good faith, and that they wanted to have a deal, etc., etc. All of this, of course, in the last 2 years of the Obama administration, the next Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who at that time, I remind everybody, was serving as Deputy Secretary of State, he was in charge of all of this. And now that he's going to take the top job, everybody is concerned that he will be the embodiment of continuity, and that he will go ahead and duplicate what the Obama administration intended to do. I fundamentally disagree with this outlook. In recent interviews, in fact, recently he was speaking on CBS News in the United States, Blinken said, "We have failed to prevent several major crises in the Arab world." He himself acknowledged this. He said, for example, on the Syria question, a decision that Blinken opposed, we failed, quote unquote, we failed to prevent a horrific loss of life. We failed to prevent massive displacement, something I will take with me for the rest of my days, end quote. Now, let's not forget that he was also one of the signatories of the Obama administration in 2018, whereby he acknowledged the initial support that the United States gave to Saudi Arabia when the war against Yemen was launched. And he regretted this, obviously. Now, a Biden administration will have to come to terms whether or not they will cut off all military involvement in the conflict to the extent that there is any military involvement left. So therefore, we are talking about a dilemma that the Biden administration faces with the Arab world. Will they be able to forge new links with Arab and Muslim countries around the world? Now, people sometimes tend to forget these things, but scholars and analysts are here to remind us all the time that Antony Blinken was one of the original drafters of Mr. Joe Biden's proposal in the Senate, back when he was in the Senate, to create 3 autonomous regions in Iraq, partitioned by ethnic or sectarian identity, which at the time was an idea that was widely rejected, including by the Prime Minister at the time. And during the Obama administration, Mr. Blinken was a key player in efforts to harness more than 60 countries to counter the developments in Iraq and Syria that led eventually to the rise of ISIS, etc., etc. It seems to me that this idea will not disappear, that partition will be part and parcel of the thinking of the administration, simply because, and not just in Iraq, but perhaps elsewhere in Syria and Lebanon too, simply because there will be a realization that if people cannot live with each other anymore, maybe they can live separately and be at peace. Now, before I conclude, let me say a few words about whether or not the Middle East will be a priority for the new administration. One is not very sure, of course, what's going to happen, but in my humble opinion, I think that the priority will not be the Middle East. The new administration will fundamentally concentrate on its relationship with Europe, the Trans-Pacific Partnership agreements. There will be no threats to pull out of NAFTA or the new accord. the Iran deal, the Paris Climate Accord, all of these issues that preoccupied the Trump administration, NATO, etc., all of this will come to an end. And we will not even hear about the United States pulling out of the World Health Organization at the height of the pandemic, as we have seen. The United States will once again try to position itself as a global power. My view is that the goal is to restore American relevance. And unlike Obama, who believed really that less boisterous and less violent policies, of course, he did not really practice what he preached because there was a great deal of violence in Yemen and elsewhere. But unlike the Obama administration, who took a low-key and very kind of mild approach, I think President Biden is an internationalist at heart who actually believes in appropriate interventions where needed. He's not going to go to war against left and right, but he will not shy from appropriate interventions, whatever he thinks those might be in the best interest, not just of the United States, but also of its partners. President Obama wasted 8 years of his presidency, and President Biden will have to move very fast and distance himself as much as possible so that he is not accused of being the third Obama administration. He wants to make sure that he has his own agenda. And far more important, he will want, that is Biden, he will want to prepare the groundwork to pass the leadership torch to Vice President Harris, who is, by all accounts, the future of American power. This is something which we are not habituated to think about so early, even before the administration came to office. But it is important to think about the fact that in the Arab world, there are opportunities now to forge different ties, not only with the Biden administration, but to take the longer view, the longer perspective, whereby you actually think about what's going to happen to the leadership in Washington 8 years from now, 12 years from now, 16 years from now, when you will have not only the Biden administration, but most likely a Kamala Harris presidency as well. There are opportunities here, of course, for Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries. Saudi Arabia is in a good position now because the Saudi ambassador to Washington is a very capable ambassador who can forge important ties over the long term, something that she should not shy away from. And we will see whether or not, of course, it's not up to us as scholars to make these decisions. Decision makers will have to factor in what is in their best interests, but presumably one takes the long-term view. And I will close by saying the following. If 4 years ago, I was afraid of what the Trump administration might do to the United States, and it was a great deal of damage around the world, today, I am much more at ease that the next 4 years will be a lot more peaceful, civil, cooperative, and sane. I'll stop here, and what we will do, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have, and we will have a conversation. Please feel free to comment on my views as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very lengthy and in-depth analysis of the US post-2020. You took us all the way through the US itself and right out the other side from the foreign policy piece. And very noticeable what you said about Iran, Turkey, Russia, and a whole host of comments you made there, which I find very, very, very fruitful and very thought-provoking. We've got a raft of questions that have come in, Dr. Joe, which I will take some of them in a moment. If I could just combine one or two of them and put a question to you directly, sort of from the chair as well. Would you characterize the 4 years of Trump as an aberration, sort of within the US policy framework?
Well,
Or,
yeah.
please go ahead.
I'm not sure whether it's an aberration. After all, a lot of people supported President Trump in 2016, and now, he got over 70 million votes. I think that it was just circumstances. Let us not forget that President Trump was running against what at that time was a shoe-in administration with then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And I remember the kind of conversations that everybody were having at the time. And Hillary Clinton used very tough words about American citizens. She called them deplorable just because they were supporting Donald Trump. And I think that America is a divided country now, unfortunately. It really is a divided country. And we'll have to see whether or not President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris can bring it back together again, can make sure that the perception of aberration that is a valid point across the world, a lot of people around the world actually believe that, whether or not this was not the case, that the divisions that exist in the United States are not very deep, they are superficial, and that they can be healed. As I've said at the very beginning of my talk, I think that there are some serious issues in the United States, racial, social issues that need to be addressed. And you cannot just push these away. It's not an aberration. It's a reflection of the divisions of the country. And hopefully these divisions will be healed.
Great, thank you. You've more or less answered my second question. My follow-up was, could you imagine sort of, in 4 years' time, like a Pompeo coming into the presidency? The reason I'm asking that is, we've seen Secretary of State very active in the region over the past, few weeks, and we do have a question that came in, and I sort of just dovetail in that. Do we expect an action against Iran, by the Trump administration within the coming 2 months? So I wonder to what extent some of this is sort of trying to sort of say, hold on, we're going to be back in 4 years' time.
I think that's wishful thinking. I think that this was a one-time deal, and I don't think that it will be very easy for the Republican Party to get its act together after the Trump administration. The Trump administration's divisiveness that I was talking about earlier really first and foremost affected rank and file Republicans. Today, you have a lot of Republicans in the country that are no longer satisfied with, especially in the leadership, senators, local officials, state officials, who are really embarrassed by, for example, what we are seeing during the past few weeks, that President Trump is not even willing to make a concession speech, not realizing that he lost the election, and that they are still hanging on to straws to think that they can reverse this decision. This is wishful thinking. Now, to address your most important question about whether or not in the remaining period of time, the next 2 months, whether or not there could be some kind of military action against Iran or another country in the region, I also think that this is wishful thinking. I don't think that there will be a war. I think one of the things about President Trump, which historians will remember maybe 20, 30, 40 years from now, is that he shares something very important with President Jimmy Carter, one of the few presidents that did not go to war, actually. And just like Jimmy Carter did not go to war, I think that President Trump will be remembered, but not now, it's too soon, but he will be remembered years from now, decades from now, that someone who has not gone to war. You remember several of the individuals, his discussions with John Bolton, for example. At one point, I remember President Trump was saying so many nice things about John Bolton, being the smartest guy he had. And then, of course, after he fired him, he said, if I listen to what John Bolton had to say, we would be in World War III now. We will have World War V, I think he said, not just 2 or 3, not just 3 and 4, but also 5. So therefore, this is a man who does not really crave for warfare. He does not want to create more problems. And this is his genius in a way. President Trump really thought that he could break Iran, since we're talking about this particular issue in focusing on Iran, he could break it without a war, that somehow he could persuade the Iranians to accept his conditions without going to war. The Iranians are too smart for him. The Iranians just wait out. But I got news for the Iranians too. They're gonna find that President Biden and his administration are gonna be much, much tougher on him than Trump ever was. I think that this is something which will surprise a lot of people. And already we are seeing tensions within the Biden team, where people are saying, yes, we want to talk to the Iranians, not secret deals. We want to talk with them, and you want to put conditions: no nuclear weapons, no ballistic missiles, no support of militias. These are not the kind of things that will be easy. And I don't think that in the remaining period of time, even though the B-52s are flying around the Middle East these days, I don't think in the short term we will see a war. I hope not.
Thank you, indeed, absolutely. I'd like to come back in a moment to sort of Biden administration on Iran. That's a very profound point you've made there. Just to dovetail, I don't want to spend too much on Trump, but just to dovetail, we do have another question, and I think it's one that deserves a bit of unpacking. It says, when the honorable lecturer says that Trump did such and such, do we understand that does Trump represent, is that his personality, his character? Or is any US president basically the manifestation or representation of policy as determined by Congress?
This is a good question. Look, American presidents, no matter how much they would like to boast about the fact that they are the most powerful men in the world, how much power they have, and President Trump was very good at this. He used to repeatedly say, I'm the most powerful man in the world. I make all the decisions without ever reading anything. At the end of the day, the United States is a country of institutions. The decision-making process is not something that could be really ignored. And there are lots of different ways for the bureaucrats in the government to actually impose their view on the president and his senior teams. It doesn't work often, which is why you don't get much done when you have an authoritarian leader who insists on his way or no way. Having said this, however, there are certain things that a president can do, especially in a way at a time when he or she is when he is rather weak, and that is to kind of prevent his successor, whoever that successor is, by making lots of appointments, by appointing a lot of judges, for example, or appointing a lot of committee chair in different places. There are thousands of these positions that are life appointments. You cannot just fire people. So therefore, President Trump, which is what's happening now as we speak, they're appointing all these judges, they're appointing all these individuals with the whole purpose of creating more trouble down the line so that potentially they could have an impact on the administration. But as I said, the United States is a country of institutions, and it's going to be very difficult for any one person to monopolize power.
Great, thank you very much. What I'd like to do now is tie two questions together that we've got. One is, what is the future of political correctness and identity politics? And then the other, if I can just flick to it very quickly, here is...
Political correctness, right.
Yes, yes. And I'm just trying to find the second one because it ties in quite nicely. Where do you see the future trajectory of the Republican Party? You've sort of touched upon that already, given the failure of the use of identity politics to get a second Trump term. I think those two questions sit together quite well.
Well, political correctness is a loaded term, of course, and one of the things that we're going to see is that people are going to be, hopefully, I'm really hoping for this. This is my personal wish. People are not going to be on Twitter or on Facebook as much as they have been. And everything doesn't have to be in the public, especially when it comes to policy, serious policy questions, that people should really think about how they are going to run a government, how they're going to perform, how they're going to serve their constituencies. You can be politically correct by saying this or that to please certain individuals. And God knows, during the past 4 years, we have seen how many people have written books after serving a year or 2 or 3 in the Trump administration. The moment they left office, they published a book. And you know, as a victim of these books, because I have to read all of these, I have read my share of over 50 books, and my head is going to explode every time I read one of these. And it is awful. This is not PC. This is not politically correct. This has got to stop. And you cannot run the most powerful position in the world through Twitter. Now, the Republican Party is in trouble. Make no mistake about that. Generally speaking, Republicans are a minority party in the United States, since there are so fewer Republicans than there are Democrats, although the number of independents is growing in the country. But the Republican Party is divided too. The Republican Party was hijacked, if you would like, by the evangelicals, those Tea Party groups, and there are a whole bunch of them, but they have been hijacked essentially from the traditional Republican Party, let's call it President Lincoln's party, because that's what it is. The real Republican Party is President Lincoln's party. And even though President Trump believed that he was the best president in the country except for Lincoln, I think a lot of Republicans will object to that. We will see what history will say. The Republican Party is divided. Whether or not it will be able to come up with an alternative candidate, or whether President Trump will manage to keep the party hostage for 4 years and run again in 2024 remains to be determined. But I think that it might be too late for him to come back, and he will have to just retire with his dignity and you know, take care. He has a young son. He would be better off serving his family and taking care of his son. If I were him, that's what I would do.
Thank you. That's probably very good advice. We should pass on. So that our next question is what would the Biden administration policy towards immigration be? Is there going to be a ban against some people from other countries who would like to come to the US? I mean, that's obviously a big and important subject for all of us.
Oh, I think already this will be the changes that will come on January 20th or 21st probably. President-elect Biden has already said that he will issue several executive orders to stop the bans that are in place for immigration. I mean, I don't think that we're gonna see the same kind of attitude, not just against Muslim countries, but we will not have President Biden say, for example, that all Mexicans are rapists, which is what we've heard before. We will not have insults going to Canada, probably the most important country that the United States has to deal with. I mean, our most important ally. And a lot of the different changes of immigration policy. Now, this is, again, an interesting, it reminded me of an interesting development that occurred a couple of years ago with Antony Blinken when he was in government, when he was the Deputy Secretary of State. Before he left office, they had issued an order for the United States to take in approximately a little less than 200,000 refugees. And we ended up 4 years later accepting less than 15,000. So presumably we will see that the United States will change immigration policies and will accept a lot more refugees in the country. And of course, the Muslim ban will disappear on January 21st, and people will be treated with the dignity that everyone deserves to be treated with.
Great, thank you. Understandably, there are quite a number of questions about Biden administration and Saudi Arabia. Will it be a sort of a loud pressing voice, or will the US prioritize Saudi relations and sort of the prosperity agenda? I mean, you touched on that a little bit, but perhaps you could maybe unpack that for us.
This is a very important question. Obviously, a lot of people are concerned about this in Saudi Arabia and in the United States too. A lot of friends of Saudi Arabia are concerned about this. There is a feeling there that because President Trump's first trip was to Saudi Arabia, a very successful trip, and because they had the President of the United States and the King of Saudi Arabia had a very close relationship, that somehow that with the Biden administration, this will disappear. That somehow the Biden administration will focus on human rights questions, will focus on pending issues that are very sensitive in both capitals, and that people will see President Biden when he comes to office to be tougher on Saudi Arabia and not take any nose from whether the king or the heir apparent, etc. My view is that, as I said earlier, the United States is a country that has a global agenda. It is not specific to certain countries. And President Trump decided to compartmentalize in order for him, most probably, this is conjecture on my part, most probably to benefit financially for himself with his businesses down the line. The Biden administration will be very different in that respect. The relationship with Saudi Arabia will be correct. It will not be based on personal ties, although some of it will be, inevitably, because you're dealing with human beings here. But generally speaking, I don't think that President Biden can distance himself from Saudi Arabia, not just because of the oil question that is very important, not just because of the arms sales question that are very important, but because Saudi Arabia is a critical country in the global scene. Not only it is a member of the G20, and we've just seen yesterday the completion of the G20 summit in Riyadh, virtual, but nevertheless an important summit, not just because of the regional presence, but because also I think President Biden realizes that Saudi Arabia is the home of Islam and that it is the custodian of the two holy mosques, figuratively and literally speaking. And let's not forget that when President Biden was Senator Biden, and during the Bosnia crisis, he repeatedly criticized the United States government at the time, the Clinton administration, about not doing enough to come to the assistance of Bosnian Muslims. So therefore, this is a person who is very familiar with the kingdom. He's been to Saudi Arabia many, many times. He knows Saudi Arabia inside out. When he was at the Council on Foreign Relations, he had probably access to the most critical information that exists in the government of the United States. I think that he is mature enough, and I think his team is clever enough to realize that the relationship with Saudi Arabia is vitally important. Saudi Arabia is not just an ordinary country for the United States. It is a vital country. And there is a special relationship, even though there is no formal defense treaty between the two countries. Nevertheless, there are lots of understandings that will continue no matter what critics will say.
Thank you. We have another question here. It says, you mentioned that the incoming administration's foreign policy posture will be characterized by internationalism, multilateralism, and mutual security cooperation. How sustainable and effective do you think this will be, given that its previous manifestations under the Obama administration in the form of the JCPOA neglected local actors' legitimate security concerns?
Well, that's an excellent question as well. I think that the internationalism, the multiculturalism, multilateralism. All of these issues are fundamental to Biden's thinking. And okay, there were differences, and Obama himself went beyond the call of duty, so to speak, to distinguish himself from the previous presidencies. And I think every president does precisely that. Every president wants to distinguish himself from his predecessor. As I said in my remarks earlier, if President Biden were to continue the same policies of President Obama, he will be accused, and correctly and rightly so, that he is representing the third Obama administration. He would not want that. Now, just for a lighter moment here to think about this in a kind of, I don't want to be funny about it, but unfortunately, this is a reality. A lot of presidents, a lot of American presidents, especially during the past 50 years or so, when they come into office, they think about their museums, their libraries, their legacies. This is very important for them because every one of them now has a library, a museum, a legacy, and they want to show off in these things. Obviously, everyone wants to be different. Everyone wants to assume that he or she is God's gift to mankind, and that they can exhibit in their museums and libraries all of their accomplishments. If you go to Simi Valley in California, for example, and visit the Ronald Reagan Library and Museum, one of the things that you will see there is a piece of the Berlin Wall next to the Boeing 707 that is now in a nice hangar. And of course, Reagan is buried next to that monument where you have the Berlin Wall. Therefore, this is something that they think about. They think about legacy. They think about what they're going to do. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the Trump library will include. We'll see whether or not they will talk about the Abraham Accords, whether they talk about moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, whether they will think of other things. Maybe they will talk about the first visit to Riyadh. But Obama is doing the same thing, preparing his library, and eventually Biden will do the same thing as well. He will also want to make sure that his legacy is distinguished as well. So therefore, all American presidents want to be different from each other. They cannot be similar to each other, and they would want to distinguish themselves as much as possible. Some of it is good, but as you can tell from my remarks, I am being satirical a little bit. Some of it is also not so good. And history will be the judge of these behaviors. And when you go and see the differences between the different museums and what people exhibit and what they show, what they have accomplished, that speaks a great deal about different presidents and what they're going to do. The United States now is a very different country from what it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. This is a country that is boiling inside out. There are lots of tensions in the country. Racial, ethnic, religious, and all of these need to be addressed. And President Biden has his work cut off for him. It's going to be a huge challenge for him. He will have to really work very hard. And he's not a young man anymore. Hopefully he has a young team. Jake Sullivan will become the youngest National Security Council advisor in the history of the country. Anthony Blinken, who is either 56 or 57, I'm not sure, maybe 58. He has 2 young children, toddlers. So therefore, we have a young team around him. So hopefully it will be productive.
Fantastic, thank you. One of our colleagues on this call takes issue with you on a point. He says, I don't agree with Dr. Shishishian that Biden's policy towards the Palestinians will be calibrated. Rather, it will be overtly pro-Israel. The likely policy is doing nothing to upset Israel without offending Arab sensibilities. How do you respond to that point, Joseph?
Yeah, I see the question here in front of me. We will see. Time will tell. But I think that the Palestinians have procrastinated for a long period of time, and it's time to have some kind of a peace accord. As King Salman of Saudi Arabia has said, even Saudi Arabia is willing to apply the 2002 Arab League condition to have full partnerships with the Israelis as long as there is a Palestinian state. And this is something which has been reiterated recently as well. So I think that the Palestinians will have to step up to the plate. The Palestinians are victims here, and they have been really given a run end, if you would like, about all of the difficult years over the years, difficult challenges over the years. And American policy has always been pro-Israeli. This is nothing new. It has always been pro-Israeli, but I think that more important than President Biden here is what I was talking about at the conclusion of my talk, that you have to think ahead of time with a Kamala Harris presence. And Kamala Harris is pro-Palestinian. Of course, she has appeared in front of AIPAC to defend Israel's right for security, etc. But she has also spoken several times about the Palestinians. And she has been very courageous to say that. And sometimes, you know, we don't mention these things, but we ought to. We ought to take into account that there is an awareness in the United States that the Palestinians have been treated unfairly, and that their land was confiscated from them. But the time has come also for the Palestinians to put all their differences aside, as the late King Abdullah and King Salman have repeatedly tried to bring them together to make sure that the Palestinians spoke with a single voice instead of continuing the divisiveness that exists between Abbas and Hamas and other groups and so on and so forth. That at the end of the day, only the Israelis.
Thank you. You've spoken at length about, you know, the importance and the durability of institutions rather than just the character of personality. And of course, those are things that political scientists like you and I love to talk about, the strength of institutions. But we also know that, I mean, during, say, the 4 years of Trump, I mean, there was quite a brain drain or a bleed from some of the leading institutions in the US. Now, Biden has a lot on his plate, as you've described it. I mean, are those institutions fit for purpose still? Are they, you know, can they still punch to their weight, as it were?
Oh, yes. Make no mistake about that. I think that the institutions are quite solid, whether it's the political parties themselves, they're very powerful. Military institutions are very powerful. The economy is still running strong. Wall Street is still leaps and bounds ahead. I think there are problems, of course, across the board, because when you nitpick to all these institutions, you leave a great deal of damage to the institution. But hopefully, the individuals that will come in now, and approximately 3,000 to 3,500 political appointees, will build on not just their colleagues during the past 4 years, but their colleagues of the past 20 years or so. And I think, you know, this is one of the key differences that exist between the United States and many European countries. And let's not forget one other very important institution that is very healthy. And all of the fake news accusations could not really move. And that's the media, the role of the press. Now, as I said, my wish is that we will step away from Twitter and we'll go back to books and magazines and journals and newspapers and think tanks where individuals will think about the issues thoroughly and will not just limit themselves to 140 characters.
Absolutely. We might see the return of experts. So we have a question on energy, which is unsurprising. How would Biden's view on eliminating fossil fuels and going towards green energy affect the balance of the oil market, considering the relevance of US shale and the current, fluctuation in the prices of oil?
That's an excellent question as well. I think that President-elect Biden has said that on January 21st, he will first of all go back to the Paris Accord over the climate change, and then within a matter of, I'm not sure how many years it will take, but to step away from oil and fossil fuels in general, to essentially have a period of transition whereby fossil fuels will gradually be replaced by alternative energy. This has been something that a lot of administration have spoken about, but they haven't done it so far for a very simple reason. The costs are astronomical. In order to replace everything that needs to be replaced, it takes time to do this. Even if a decision was made to have energy independence and distance oneself from fossil fuels today, it will not be in effect for at least 20 years, because you have to replace, think about it, every single factory that runs on fossil fuels. You have to replace all the trucks, all the cars, all the motorcycles. I mean, you name it. You're talking about an entire infrastructure that needs to be changed. The decision, I think the Paris Climate Accord is the future, really. We're going there. But it will not happen under the Biden administration within a matter of a few years. It will start probably, but it will take at least a decade, maybe more, for it to be applied. And I don't think there is a fear for oil over the short to medium term. There is a fear over the long term, no question about that. But obviously oil will have to be used for much more useful purposes than wasted as gasoline. Oil can be used for alternative energy as well. And the Arab countries led by Saudi Arabia will have to invest in alternative energy as well, whether it is solar energy, gas, and other issues. So therefore, this is a long-term relationship that will exist, and the investments will show how fast we will move. Biden is on record for saying that he wants to apply the climate change accord, the climate accords, and that he wants to distance gradually the United States and the industrialized world from fossil fuels.
Thank you. You mentioned sort of a Biden administration being more muscular in pushing back against Russia, or at least sort of meeting the challenge of Russia. What might that look like, and what could the implications for the region be? Specifically, I'm specifically thinking of Syria, maybe.
Yeah, I meant to mention this, but it escaped me because there are so many things in my head. I'm glad that you reminded me about it, Anil. This is very important. Now, you know, President Putin is president for life. He and his predecessor, Dmitry Medvedev, exchange positions once in a while, but now they're not even pretending that. They're changing the constitution so that President Putin can stay in power until he dies. And I think President Putin is a very powerful man, obviously, and Russia is an important country that needs to be taken into account. But I've always been mesmerized by the fact that other than nuclear power, which obviously the Russians have, the size of the Russian economy is not all that big. In fact, Italy has a larger economy than Russia does. So we're not talking about a country that is all powerful, that can impose itself on the global economic level. In fact, President Obama insulted President Putin one time when he referred to Russia as a regional power. And that was the ultimate insult for President Putin. Obviously, in the Middle East, President Putin wants to play a bigger role, and he has shown that he can actually play a big role, especially in Syria. And he is making his mark there, no question about that. But the Biden administration will have to come to terms with the fact that Russia has in fact violated international law, whether it is in Ukraine, in the Ukraine war, whether it is with the invasion and occupation of the Crimean Peninsula, whether it is in a variety of other areas. And there will have to come some kind of a new relationship. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, again, the Biden administration, when they come to power on January 20th, they will have about 2 weeks or so to either renew the START agreement or renegotiate one. And I think that they have a window of about 2 weeks. Again, I'm not sure about the exact dates, but they're under the gun because President Trump wants to abandon the START agreement that was signed some years back. So therefore, there's got to be a recalibration of the relationship with Russia. Russia is an important country because of its nuclear arsenals. No question about that. It is a large landmass. No question about that. It will continue to exercise a great deal of influence in the Middle East, in Europe. No question about that. And the United States will have to come to terms with it. President Trump was mesmerized by President Putin. He considered him to be the wealthiest person on earth. And since President Trump measured everything through cash, through money, obviously Putin stood out for him. But that doesn't always work in the real world. So Washington under President Biden will have to recalibrate, as I say. Russia is the big question that I have. I think that Biden will find language with Xi Jinping a lot easier than it is with Vladimir Putin. I think that we will see some tension between Russia and the United States. I hope it will not be too hard of a tension, but it will be there.
Thank you. I'm glad you segued there in a way to China. And two of the terms you've used so far, you talked about sort of cooperation and civility of the Biden administration. I mean, you touched upon it before, but how do you see that the trajectory of the relations between the two? You know, we've all been reading and taking part in conversations around decoupling over the past, couple of years. With this pandemic, we talk about the end of globalization and a further deepening and decoupling. Does the Biden administration arrive at a time when it's pivotal to sort of pushing aside decoupling, or is that a trajectory we're on structurally anyway?
Well, there is rivalry, no doubt about that. There is a great deal of rivalry between the United States and China. This will not go away. The Chinese are very ambitious. They want to not only have their say in Asia, but they're making inroads throughout Africa. They're investing heavily. They are hardworking people, but they also need markets. They also need to sell their goods. And the primary markets for them that are vital are the United States and Europe. And their goods are sold primarily in Western Europe and the United States. So therefore, the relationship is a symbiotic relationship. Look, let's not kid around. Let's be honest about this. China is the up-and-coming country, and it is the only power that can overtake the United States in all shapes, way, or form, economically, militarily, socially, etc. And again, this is not something that will happen in 4 years under the Biden administration. It will take a lot longer, but the ambition is there for China to exercise its will to power, its will to domination, if you would like, its will for hegemony. I'm using raw words, perhaps not as diplomatic as I should, but those are the sentiments. The Chinese, rightly so, believe that they are a great people and that this is their time to go ahead and exercise their will to power, and that this is their opportunity to continue to exercise the rising power of China. On the other hand, the United States and its allies is not going to just roll over and play dead. This is not going to happen. The United States is still the world's leading power. It has lots of allies, especially if the European and Asian allies that it has back it, and they will, because obviously it's in their interest to do this. And I'm not one of those individuals that think that the time has come for the United States to essentially wither away in history, and the time has come and it's finished. I still think that the United States will continue to exercise a great deal of power and influence, if not for the next few years, at least for a generation, maybe more. And the differences are just tremendous, even though there are internal problems in the United States, social, economic, there is poverty and so on. But in China as well, the Chinese have got to come to terms with the fact that 500 million people still need tender loving care, even though they have 500 million middle-class individuals who are making contributions. Nevertheless, there are also 500 million poor people in China that need attention as well. So the tension between the two is there, it's growing. And the Chinese are very clever. What they're doing, they're looking for alternative markets. They're looking for alternative avenues to exercise their power. They have now the so-called Silk Road throughout Asia, coming all the way to the Middle East and Africa, of course. They're investing tremendous amounts of money in Africa. But there is also something, again, which is not discussed very much, but it's there as well. There is also inherent racism in China too. And people don't want to talk about these issues. But in the hegemonic view, the Chinese in Africa are not really exercising the kind of benevolence that people expect. That doesn't mean that the white colonialists did 50 years ago any differently. But nevertheless, we are in the post-colonial era now. We should have learned our lessons, and the Chinese should have learned the lessons from the Europeans and the Westerners in general, not to repeat the same thing. So I don't want to give you a winded answer to this very important question, but I think that the tensions are there, and China and the United States will be competitors, but they also have a great deal at stake to cooperate. And they will accomplish, both of them will accomplish far more if they cooperate. The tensions will remain, especially with Japan and Korea, two vital countries, but both of them are entirely pro-Western before they are pro-Chinese.
Great, thank you, Joe. That was a great and detailed answer. We've got a really neat question. It says, what advantageous situation would Trump leave for Biden to build upon?
Well, the one thing that he did, which I must give credit to President Trump, he really did make inroads in the economy of the United States. The economy there were lots of regulations that prevented investors to come in, and the economy was doing a lot better. So I think that President Trump should receive credit for this as well. And again, if you put away his jingoistic nationalism and fake nationalism, as I call it, I think that there's a great deal in terms of the economy that will shine very well on him in the future. And President-elect Biden will have to build on that to make sure that the economy is strengthened. At the end of the day, the United States has over $22 trillion in foreign debt that needs to be repaid. And that can only be repaid over the years if the economy once again becomes stronger, not as everybody would say beautiful, but stronger. In other words, you have to be productive. You don't have to be beautiful. You have to be productive, and that's his legacy. I think that really is his legacy.
Thank you. We've exhausted all our questions, so I'll just put one final one to you, Joe. And I can hear your throat. You've been speaking for an hour and a half, which is very valiant. I would have lost my voice by now, for sure.
Thank you.
Do you expect Biden to see out his 4 years? There's a sort of speculation and guesswork whether, after 2 years, Harris will fill his shoes. Is that something you entertain, or you just think that's just this gossip on Twitter?
Well, that's only God knows how long someone will live. I think that President Biden will serve his full term, and he has said that he will not run again, even though his sister has insisted that it will not be a one-term presidency. Not he, but his sister has said that. You know, time will tell. He's a 78-year-old man. He will become the oldest president in the history of the United States. But he's, as far as I know, everything that I read about him, and as far as I know, he's in good health. He does not have any health problems. People sometimes have hard time understanding him, but they forget that when he was a child, he had a stuttering problem. Right. And over the years, that left some kind of a sequel. When he speaks, he has to speak very slowly in order to articulate every word that comes out of his mouth. Sometimes, which is my case too, sometimes my mouth is much faster than my brain, which is his case as well. So sometimes we eat half of the words that we speak. But as far as I know, he is in good health. But as I said, as a scholar, I'm talking about, not a policymaker. Obviously, I'm not a policy decision maker. Whether or not President Biden serves his full term or not is redundant at this point, because he has made a fundamental break with the way policy was conducted in the United States by appointing Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is very different from Joe Biden, by the way. Kamala Harris is very different from Barack Obama, not Joe Biden. Barack Obama, whose mother was white, had always this sentiment that he had to prove himself, that he had to, in the white establishment, the Beau-Wash corridor, that he had to prove himself, even though he's a brilliant man, even though he graduated from Harvard Law School, and he has accomplished a lot of things, but he still had this view that he had to prove himself in the establishment. Kamala Harris doesn't have, it seems to me, she doesn't have that handicap. She is the daughter of a Jamaican and an Indian, and she is very much comfortable under her skin. You can tell. You can tell by looking at her, listening to her, interacting with her, speaking with her. And decision makers who will have the opportunity to actually exchange views with her will realize this. She's the future. America is changing. At one point, the American demographics were mostly white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Today, America's demographics are changing dramatically. You have a very large Latino community. You have, of course, Blacks and other minorities, Chinese, etc. But you also, very importantly, have a lot of immigrants in the country. 12 to 13% of naturalized American citizens today have a voice that is different from the white establishment that existed before. And in places like Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, those percentages are much higher. In fact, in California, it's 27% as naturalized citizens. So therefore, America is changing, and the future is Kamala Harris. The future is Kamala Harris, and her legacy will be very important as well. Now, we'll have to wait and see how she behaves and how she conducts herself, how she behaves in the political sense, how she conducts herself politically, whether or not she will assume the burden, whether she will share the responsibilities of the Biden administration. Presumably she will, because she's young, she's capable, she's smart, and she will have lots of challenges ahead. We will have to wait and see whether she rises up to the occasion. I am confident that she will. And my advice for the 2 cents that are worth for everyone in the Middle East is not just to look at Mr. Biden, but also to forge very close relationships with Kamala Harris and her team.
That's a great point to finish on, Joe. I think that was very masterful to land at that point. I think forward looking is very important.
Thank you.
If we were around a table now, I would ask our audience, our colleagues, to sort of show their appreciation for your tremendous contribution there. You spoke very eloquently. you gave us a detailed tour of US, after the elections, and it was a very enriching conversation. So thank you very much, and you deserve to rest that voice and have some warm tea or something to lift off that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank my colleagues at the King Faisal Center for organizing this panel, and wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much for joining us, and until the next webinar, thank you so much indeed. Signing off.